This is Jocelyn from Fantasia Elegance with a jewelry tutorial for House of Gems. In this video, I'll be showing you how to make 3 different styles of French hook ear wires, also known as shepherd's hooks or fisherman's hook. For the first pair, we're going to be making this very simple and easy design you can see here. For the second pair, we're going to make a twisted wire style. And for the third pair, we're going to do a coil and ball design of French hook ear wire. So to get started, let's take a look at some of the tools you'll be needing to make these ear wires. First of all, of course, you'll be wanting flush cutters, round nose pliers, and chain nose pliers. It'll also be very handy to have a steel jeweler's bench block and hammer, and a round implement such as a pen or pencil for shaping the ear wires around. So the wires you'll be needing to make these, for the first pair, the simple ear wires, you're going to want a 3 3/4 inch piece of 21 gauge wire. You may also use 22 gauge or 20 gauge. I find that 21 is the ideal diameter to make comfortable hooks for most types of ears. And of course, half hard is going to be best to give your earrings a little bit more strength. For the middle pair here, the twisted French hooks, you're going to want 2 pieces of 5 1/2 inches. And I'll be using 24 gauge. You could also use 26, but again, the 24 gauge is going to make stronger earrings. For our last pair, the coil and ball earrings, you're going to want to use a 4-inch piece of 22 gauge wire. And you'll also need for that some 24 gauge to make the coil, and some 3mm round beads. So to start out with the standard pair, you're going to need again a 3 3/4 inch piece of 21 gauge wire. And the first thing we're going to do is just bend this wire right in half. So I'm going to grasp the 2 ends, pull this into a U shape, and you want to make sure that you get it bent right in the middle. And then I'm going to crimp it with my chain nose pliers. And you're going to just make a very sharp bend right here. And the beauty of this way of making the French hooks is that it's very easy to get them both identical, and it's really much less effort. You're almost getting 2 hooks for the same amount of effort as one. So once I have my wire crimped tightly right in the middle, I'm going to take round nose pliers, and I'm going to start forming a closed loop. And this is going to be the loop on the bottom of your French hook ear wires through which you will attach your earring. So you can make this however large you like it to be. If you don't want to run out of wire, I would recommend not making it too huge, otherwise you'll need to increase the amount of wire you're using. So once you've made that loop, you can either use your round nose pliers again, or take a round object and wrap both tails around this to get the general shape for your ear wires. And of course you will need to do some tweaking afterwards, just to make sure that both of your ear wires are going to be a nice shape. And you notice that these are still both connected. We're going to solve that in a moment. So once you're happy with your curve, I like to go ahead and put in a straight portion at the bottom. This makes it easier to insert into the ear. So I'm going to grip it about, less than 1/2 inch up from the bottom, and just bend those 2 tails right out like that. Next, I'll take my flush cutters, and of course using the flush side, I'm going to trim off the ends here so they're both even. And then, where the magic happens, I'm going to go to the base here where we had our wires attached, and as close as I can get to the end, if I can get it to focus, I'm going to snip off first one side, and then the other. And so I have 2 identical ear wires. And of course, you can very simply close up that small gap that we got there. Just like so. And there you have them. Obviously, to attach your rest of your earring, you would just bend this open or use a jump ring. I do like to either tumble these or hammer them out on my bench block to make sure that they have plenty of stability. So to hammer this, of course, you would just lay it flat on your bench block, use the flat side of your hammer, and hammer it all out evenly. Here we are, and you can again just close it up if it opens up a little bit. And for your last step, you would just take a metal file or some sandpaper, or a nail file is one of my favorite things to use, and just buff off the end, making sure that it's comfortable to go into the ear. And if you notice, I'm not just going straight across like so, I'm tilting it to get all the edges for kind of a rounded cupped end of the wire almost. And you would simply repeat that with your matching wire. So there's how to make a very simple French hook wire. Let's move on to our slightly fancier pair here with the twisted wire design. And for this pair, I'm actually going to be using copper wire. Again, we're going to have, for each hook, we want a 5.5 inch piece of 24 gauge, and I'm using dead soft wire. So same as before, we're going to bend this right in half. And the difference here is that instead of having the two ends even, I'm going to make one about 1/2 inch longer than the other. And then I'm going to, as before, crimp this. Now, once you have a tight crimp here, you want your two wires to cross each other and go in opposite directions, because this is where we're going to start our spiral. And on this pair, we're actually starting with the end of the wire that goes into your ear. So once I have my two wires crossing, I'm just going to grip this little end right here and start twisting the wires. And you want to have a nice tight twist, and you're just going to keep twisting this down the wire. Until you have approximately 1 inch left on the longer tail. Let me move that, it might be interfering with focusing. At this point, I like to run my fingers over this like so, just to work harden it a little bit, and also to even out the twists, make sure there aren't any funny kinks that are going to look a little awkward in our design. Okay, so since we're starting at the bottom, first thing you're going to do is make this initial bend upwards so we can have the straight portion of our ear wire. I like to do this a little over 1/4 inch up. So I'm going to grip it with my chain nose pliers and bend it up at an angle like that. Then we're going to form the rounded portion. So once again, I'm just wrapping this around my pen here. And I'm going to make a little bit of a tighter loop, just so it looks a little bit neater. Now, once you have your tail coming out roughly parallel to our straight bit right here, we're going to take some chain nose pliers, and you're going to find the spot roughly across from this first bend that we made. Perhaps a little bit higher up than that. You're going to bend the wire so that it's going straight down. Now you're going to make another bend, leaving a short space, just like so, and then make a closed loop going up like so. And now you'll notice with my two tails, I'm going to put one on one side of the hook and the other on the other side as I close this up. I'm going to bring them all the way over so that they're around the base of that little straight bit we just made. I'm just straightening this out a little bit. And then we're going to start wrapping each of these wires around the base right here. So I'm going to start with the longer one. And you can see I'm just wrapping this around the base. And I'm going to make multiple wraps very snugly right next to each other. We're basically making a wrapped shank for the base of this ear wire. And I'm going to continue wrapping it like this and making sure they're very tight and snug as I go. I'm going to continue wrapping like that until I reach the spot where our straight portion ends and our curve begins. At that point, I'm going to take my flush cutters and trim off the end of that longer tail. And going back to my chain nose pliers, I'm just going to snug that end down. And make sure that my coils are all scrunched up close to each other. Now we just have this one tail left. We're going to do the same thing. You'll notice we don't have quite as much space to wrap this one. So I'm going to make one wrap below our first wrap with the other wires. And then I'm going to bring this over and down into our loop, so you can see. So that I have one more wrap around the loop here. And let me snug that down again. So at this point, I'm going to once again trim off the excess very close to the ear wire and snug down the last little bit. You want to feel it and make sure there aren't any ends poking out that you can tell. So here it is from the front. And you can see our shape got ever so slightly out of whack, so I'm just going to fix that up. Now you can also hammer this out lightly to give it some extra strength. I would highly recommend tumbling it as well, because we did have to use a smaller gauge of wire. Even though it's twisted, it's still not quite as strong as, say, using a 21 gauge wire. But I do feel the effect is definitely worth it because this twist is very pretty. And as you can see here, what I did with this silver pair was to patina the wire and then polish it up afterwards, which is very successful on these twisted ear hooks because of the nice contrast you get. So that's another idea for you. Okay, moving right along. our final pair, we're going to learn how to make these coil and ball ear hooks. So to start out, we're going to take one piece of 22 gauge wire. This is going to be 4 inches long. And again, we're going to start by bending this in half and making sure the two ends are even. We're going to do this one similarly to the first pair, except in terms of them being connected while we make them, except we'll be starting at the opposite end of the ear hook. So I'm just crimping this tightly. So what I mean by that is that we're going to start by making this portion and then work our way around to the coiled portion. So making sure that my two wires are lying nice and flat and parallel to each other, just like so. I'm going to start by making that initial bend, again about 1/4 of an inch in. Wrapping it around our pen or pencil or other round object. And then closing that up a little bit more with my round nose pliers. Okay, as before, we're going to curve around in a nice arc shape, and you're going to find the point roughly across from our first bend here. Let me just reverse it here. Grip with your chain nose pliers, bend the wire straight down, and at this point I'm actually going to go ahead and disconnect these two wires by simply snipping off the very tip here where they were connected. There we go. Now these are ready to receive the coil that's going to go on up here, so let's go ahead and make that part. You're going to need for this a small scrap of 20 gauge wire and your 24 gauge dead soft wire. We're going to start by wrapping our 24 gauge wire in a tight coil around this scrap piece of 20 gauge wire. You want to make sure that the coils are touching. And once you have approximately a 1/2 inch of coil right here, you're going to simply slide it off of your scrap wire and trim it off of your spool right there. Then you're going to cut this approximately in half, just like so. And I'm going to straighten up the ends here by making sure that the cuts, the flush side of the cuts, are towards the coil. Just like so. And then we're going to take one of these coils and our ear hook that we prepared earlier, and you're going to simply slide this onto the end. Just like so. Now you can adjust the length of this to your personal preference. I like the coil to be a little bit shorter, perhaps. There we are. Once you're happy with the length of the coil, you take your 3mm bead slide it on, just like so. And then all we need to do is make a loop right here. I'm going to take my chain nose pliers and make a bend to one side directly below our bead. Just like that. Switching to round nose. Just going to bring this wire on around. Perhaps a little bit bigger loop than that. There we are. And then you trim this extra bit of wire we have here. And simply close that on up. And there you have it, your wrapped loop and ball hook. And you would simply make the second one to match. And if you'd wish, you could go ahead and hammer this one out as well. All you'd have to do is make sure that you position it on the edge so that you aren't hammering your wrapped loop that you made. And I also like to hammer this end down here just to give it some extra strength. So there you have it. You now know, hopefully, how to make 3 different types of French hook ear wires. And these are super helpful to save on buying your own findings, of course. And it's fun to experiment with different fancy types that you can do, such as the twisted pair. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful. As always, happy crafting!